The early autumn air in Clearwater, Montana, carried a crispness that Alex Carter hadn't felt in years. As his battered blue pickup rolled into the small town, he took in the sight of tree-lined streets, weathered storefronts, and a clock tower that seemed frozen in time. It was exactly what he had been searching for: quiet, unassuming, and far removed from the chaos of his old life. Alex wasn't running from his past so much as he was trying to redefine his future. After years as a firefighter in a bustling city, the weight of loss had pushed him to seek solitude. Clearwater offered the kind of serenity he needed, and the modest cabin he'd rented on the edge of town promised space to breathe and think. His plan was simple: open a small woodworking business, spend his days crafting furniture, and finally allow his life to slow down. He parked near a diner called Millie's, its neon sign flickering stubbornly against the afternoon sun. Inside, the scent of coffee and fresh-baked pies greeted him. The chatter of locals filled the air, punctuated by the occasional clink of silverware. Alex chose a booth near the window, appreciating the view of the town square. He nodded to the waitress who approached, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Her name tag read Linda. "What can I get you, stranger?" she asked, her voice tinged with curiosity. "Just coffee for now," Alex replied, "and maybe some advice on where to get good lumber around here." Linda smiled faintly as she jotted down his order. "Planning to build something?" "Planning to build a lot of things," Alex said. "I'm starting a woodworking business. Moved in a couple of days ago." "That's so?" Linda placed her pin in her apron pocket. "Welcome to Clearwater. Not much happens here, but we're a friendly town mostly." The way her voice hesitated on the last word didn't escape Alex. He didn't press her, though. Small towns often had undercurrents of tension beneath their charm. As she walked away, Alex let his gaze wander, taking in the mix of locals. There were older couples sipping coffee, a group of teens laughing in a corner booth, and a young family seated nearby. It wasn't until a shadow passed the window that Alex noticed them. A group of 3 young men swaggering into the diner, their loud laughter slicing through the peaceful atmosphere. The leader, a wiry man with sandy blonde hair and a cocky smirk, strutted in like he owned the place. Behind him were 2 bulkier men, their postures exuding the kind of confidence born from having the upper hand too often. "Ryan Hastings," Linda muttered as she refilled Alex's coffee. She didn't bother hiding her disdain. "And his shadows, they're trouble. Big fish in a small pond?" Alex asked, his tone light but his gaze sharp. "You could say that. His dad owns half the businesses in town, and the police chief's his uncle." Linda sighed, setting the coffee pot on the counter. "They think they run this place. Most folks just try to steer clear." As if to one of her words, Ryan's gaze swept the diner, lingering briefly on Alex before landing on the young family in the corner. Alex's jaw tightened as Ryan strolled toward their table. The family, a black man, his wife, and their young son, tensed as Ryan leaned over the father with a sneer. "Well, if it isn't the Reeds," Ryan drawled. "You settling in okay? Must be hard, being so different." The father, a man in his 30s with a calm but firm demeanor, locked eyes with Ryan. "We're doing just fine, thanks." Ryan chuckled, glancing back at his friends. "That's good. We wouldn't want any trouble, would we?" Alex's instincts flared. He'd seen this dynamic before, power wielded like a weapon against those without it. The other diners averted their eyes, pretending not to notice the exchange. "Hey," Alex called out, his voice steady but loud enough to cut through the tension. "Your buddies lose their booth? Or do you just like bothering people?" The diner went silent. Ryan turned slowly, his smirk faltering as he sized up Alex. "And who are you supposed to be?" "Just someone who came here for coffee," Alex said, leaning back in his booth. "But it seems like you're making that difficult." Ryan's smirk returned, but there was a flicker of unease in his eyes. "You must be new. Here's some advice. Mind your own business." "Good advice," Alex replied evenly. "Why don't you take it?" A murmur rippled through the diner as Ryan stared at Alex, his fists clenching. For a moment, it seemed like he might charge, but his friends pulled him back. "Come on, Ryan," one of them muttered. "Not here." Ryan held Alex's gaze for a beat longer, then straightened. Watch yourself, stranger, he said, his voice low and venomous. This town doesn't take kindly to outsiders. Alex didn't respond, and Ryan finally stormed out, his friends trailing behind him. The tension in the diner eased as conversations cautiously resumed. Linda approached Alex's booth, her expression a mix of gratitude and concern. You shouldn't have done that, she said softly. Ryan doesn't like being challenged. Alex shrugged. Bullies never do. You're either brave or crazy, Linda said, shaking her head. Maybe both. Alex offered a faint smile but didn't say more. As he finished his coffee, his mind raced. Clearwater might have seemed like a peaceful town, but it was clear that shadows lingered here. And Alex couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just stepped into the middle of something much larger than he'd anticipated. For better or worse, he wasn't the kind of man to back down. The air outside Millie's diner was crisp and cool as Alex stepped out, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows on the small town streets. He glanced toward the Reed's truck, now marked with streaks of mud and fresh scratches that hadn't been there when they arrived. It was subtle, but it spoke volumes. Alex sighed, knowing instinctively that Ryan Hastings and his gang were behind it. Clearwater was starting to feel less like a peaceful retreat and more like a test of his patience. As Alex walked toward his truck, he noticed Tom Reed, the teenage son, sitting on the tailgate of their battered vehicle, his head hung low. Tom couldn't have been more than 16, his lanky frame still growing into itself. Alex hesitated for a moment, then approached. Hey, Alex said, his voice calm but firm. Rough day? Tom looked up, his dark eyes filled with frustration and something deeper, fear. He shrugged, trying to appear indifferent. Just a normal day here. Normal, huh? Alex leaned against the truck, folding his arms. Doesn't look like it should be. Tom hesitated, glancing toward the diner where his parents were still inside. It's not like anyone's gonna do anything about it. Not with the Hastings running everything. Alex nodded slowly, letting the boy's words sink in. That why no one speaks up? Because of Ryan's dad? Tom's eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, as if he were afraid someone might overhear. His dad owns half the businesses in town, and his uncle's the police chief. If you push too hard, they make sure you regret it. Alex could feel the weight of the boy's words. It wasn't just fear. It was resignation, the kind that came from years of watching people lose hope. Alex knew that feeling well. He straightened and gave Tom a reassuring pat on the shoulder. Thanks for telling me, Alex said, but let me give you some advice. Bullies only have power if you let them. It's when people stand together that they start losing. Tom gave him a skeptical look, but there was a glimmer of curiosity in his expression. You don't know this place, man. You don't know what they're like. Alex smiled faintly. Maybe not yet, but I'm a fast learner. Back at his cabin, Alex sat at the small kitchen table, a notepad in front of him. He wasn't one to jump into a fight unprepared. Years as a firefighter had taught him that much. He began writing down everything he'd learned. The Hastings family's influence, the townspeople's silence, and the clear line between fear and complicity. Clearwater was more than just a town with a bully problem. It was a town trapped under the thumb of a corrupt system. The next day, Alex decided to dig deeper. He started at the local hardware store, chatting with the owner, an older man named Harvey, who seemed more willing to talk than most. Alex casually brought up the Hastings name while paying for supplies. They've been around a long time, Harvey said, his voice low. William Hastings, Ryan's father, practically built this town. Or at least, that's what he wants everyone to think. And the son? Alex pressed. Harvey sighed, glancing toward the window as if checking for prying eyes. Ryan? He's a spoiled brat with a mean streak. Likes to throw his weight around, especially with folks who can't fight back. He's got a crew of thugs who'll do anything he says. Alex nodded, filing the information away. And the police? Harvey's expression darkened. Ryan's uncle, Chief Marshal, keeps the whole thing under wraps. Any complaints against Ryan disappear. You're better off keeping your head down, stranger. Alex thanked Harvey and left, his resolve hardening. He could feel the outlines of the problem now. A powerful family using their influence to keep the town under control. What he needed next was proof. As Alex began gathering information, he noticed more signs of the Hastings grip on the town. At the community center, a small gathering of locals whispered about recent vandalism at a minority-owned cafe. At the grocery store, he overheard a heated conversation about a shopkeeper being strong-armed into donating money to a local fund. The more Alex listened, the clearer it became that the Hastings weren't just bullies. They were running a racket. One evening, Alex found himself walking past the Reeds' modest home. He spotted Tom sitting on the front steps, fiddling with a basketball. Alex decided to stop by, offering to shoot some hoops in the driveway. The boy hesitated but eventually shrugged and passed Alex the ball. As they played, Alex steered the conversation carefully. "You ever think about standing up to them?" Tom snorted, missing a shot. "You don't get it. Ryan's not just some jerk. He's untouchable. Even the cops won't mess with him." "What if someone made him touchable?" Alex asked, catching the rebound and sinking a clean shot. Tom looked at him, skeptical. "What, like you?" Alex smiled. "Not just me. It takes a lot of people to make a difference. But someone has to start." Tom didn't say anything, but Alex could see the gears turning in the boy's mind. That weekend, Alex returned to the diner, his truck parked conspicuously near the entrance. As he stepped inside, he spotted Linda behind the counter. She gave him a knowing look and poured him a cup of coffee without asking. "You're stirring things up," she said as he sat at the counter. "Just trying to understand how things got this bad," Alex replied. Linda leaned closer, her voice dropping. "It's been like this for years. People are afraid to fight back because they know what happens when they do." Alex took a sip of his coffee. "And what happens?" Linda's gaze shifted to the corner of the diner, where an older man sat alone, his hands trembling as he nursed a cup of tea. "That's Earl. Used to run a repair shop until Ryan and his buddies trashed the place. He filed a complaint, but nothing came of it. Now he's out of business, and no one wants to hire him." Alex followed her gaze, his chest tightening. It was one thing to suspect corruption. It was another to see its victims. What if someone fought back? Alex asked. Linda's eyes softened, but there was doubt in her expression. "I'd like to think it's possible, but no one's tried in a long time." "Well," Alex said, setting down his mug, "maybe it's time someone did." As Alex left the diner, he noticed Ryan's truck parked nearby, its occupants watching him. Alex felt their eyes on him as he climbed into his own vehicle. The message was clear. They were paying attention. Good, Alex thought. So am I. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Alex's cabin as he laced up his boots. The tension in Clearwater was palpable, like the air before a storm. Since his quiet confrontation with Ryan Hastings, Alex had noticed subtle but undeniable signs of retaliation. His truck had been egged the previous night, and he'd seen Ryan's gang loitering around his property more than once. But the vandalism didn't anger him. It fueled his resolve. As he headed into town, Alex stopped by the community center to speak with Rachel Lawson, the young lawyer he'd been introduced to by Linda. Rachel had moved to Clearwater from Seattle a year ago, hoping for a quieter life, but she had quickly realized the depth of the town's issues. She had a reputation for standing her ground, despite the Hastings family's dominance. "You've got guts, I'll give you that," Rachel said as Alex laid out the evidence he'd been collecting. "But guts only get you so far. If you're serious about this, you'll need more than stories and observations. You'll need hard proof." Alex nodded. "I've been documenting everything, photos, notes, even a few videos. But it's not enough to bring them down, is it?" "Not by itself," Rachel admitted, pushing her glasses up the bridge of her nose. "But combined with testimony from the people they've hurt, it could make a case strong enough to bypass their local influence." "Then we need to get people talking," Alex said. "That's easier said than done," Rachel replied. "Most of the people in this town are too scared to speak out. The Hastings have made sure of that." Alex leaned back in his chair, his mind working. What if they had a reason to believe things could change? Rachel's lips curved into a small, wry smile. "If you can pull that off, I'm in." That evening, Alex hosted a small meeting at the community center. Word had spread through Linda and Harvey, and to his surprise, about a dozen people showed up. Among them were Eleanor, the elderly shopkeeper, Tom Reed and his father, and a few business owners Alex had spoken to in passing. They all looked nervous, casting glances toward the windows as though expecting Ryan or his gang to burst in. Alex stood at the front of the room, his voice steady but firm. "I know why you're all here. You've seen what's happening in this town, how one family has held it hostage for years. But we all know that nothing changes if we stay silent." Eleanor was the first to speak up. "I've been in Clearwater for 50 years. I've watched people come and go, but the Hastings have always been untouchable. What makes you think this time will be any different?" Alex met her gaze. "Because this time, they've pushed too far. And this time, we have each other." There was a murmur of agreement, hesitant but growing. Tom's father, Michael Reed, stood next. "They targeted my family from the moment we moved here. My wife and I talked about leaving more times than I can count, but it's not right to run. This is our home too." Others began sharing their stories. Businesses vandalized, threats issued, jobs lost. Each account painted a damning picture of the Hastings family's stranglehold on the town. By the end of the meeting, a fragile sense of unity had formed. They agreed to gather more evidence and prepare statements, and Rachel promised to begin drafting a formal complaint. But Alex knew the Hastings wouldn't sit idly by. The retaliation came faster than he expected. The following morning, Alex arrived at the community center to find graffiti scrawled across its walls. "Outsiders not welcome." Windows were smashed, and equipment had been overturned inside. The message was clear. Ryan's gang was escalating. The police arrived, but Alex could see the futility in their eyes. Chief Marshall, Ryan's uncle, stepped out of his squad car, his expression one of forced politeness. "Looks like some kids got carried away," Marshall said, his tone dismissive. Alex crossed his arms. "Kids, huh? Let me guess. They drive a red pickup with a dented tailgate?" Marshall's jaw tightened, but he kept his composure. "Unless you've got evidence, Mr. Carter, there's not much we can do." Alex didn't respond, his silence speaking volumes. As Marshall and his officers left, Alex made a point of snapping photos of the damage. If the police wouldn't help, he'd build his case another way. Later that day, Alex caught sight of Ryan and his gang at a local park, laughing and tossing a football around like they didn't have a care in the world. His instinct was to confront them, but Rachel's advice echoed in his mind. Don't give them a reason to play the victim. Instead, he waited. When Ryan and his friends left, Alex followed at a distance, keeping his truck far enough back to avoid suspicion. They stopped at an old warehouse on the outskirts of town, a known hangout spot for the gang. Alex parked a few blocks away and used his phone to record their movements. Inside, Ryan and his crew weren't just goofing off. Alex captured footage of them unloading boxes from a truck, boxes marked with labels from local businesses. It didn't take long for Alex to piece it together. Ryan's gang was extorting local shop owners and using the warehouse to stash stolen goods. Alex sent the footage to Rachel and Ben, the young journalist who had been itching for a story. Ben's reply came quickly. "This is gold, but it's not enough to take them down. Keep digging." A few nights later, the confrontation Alex had been expecting finally happened. As he worked late in his shop, the sound of breaking glass shattered the quiet. Alex turned to see Ryan's gang outside, hurling rocks through his windows. "Come out, Carter," Ryan shouted, his voice slurred with drunken bravado. "Let's see how tough you really are." Alex stepped outside, his calm demeanor hiding the tension in his chest. He wasn't looking for a fight, but he wouldn't back down either. "This is how you solve your problems?" Alex said, his voice steady. "Breaking windows like teenagers?" Ryan sneered. "You think you're better than us? You don't belong here, Carter. Nobody wants you here." Alex took a step forward, his eyes locking onto Ryan's. "If that were true, you wouldn't need to try so hard to scare me." Ryan lunged, but Alex was ready. Years of firefighting had honed his reflexes, and he sidestepped easily, twisting Ryan's arm and pinning him to the ground. Ryan's friends froze, their bravado evaporating. "You're done," Alex said, his voice low and firm. "You don't scare me, and you're not scaring this town anymore." He released Ryan and stepped back, watching as the gang scrambled to help their leader. Ryan glared at Alex, his face twisted with humiliation and rage. "This isn't over," Ryan spat. Alex watched them retreat, his jaw tight. He knew Ryan was right. It wasn't over. But Clearwater wasn't the same town it had been a few weeks ago. The community was starting to stand, and Alex was just getting started. The morning after Ryan's late-night tantrum, Alex Carter surveyed the damage to his workshop. Broken glass crunched underfoot as he swept the floor. But his mind wasn't on the mess. It was on the next steps. The town was stirring, its long-dormant spirit beginning to awaken. But Ryan Hastings and his gang were only the surface of a deeper rot, and Alex knew the real battle was still ahead. Later that day, Alex met Rachel Lawson and Ben Collins at the community center. Rachel was already flipping through a thick file of papers, her pen tapping against the table. Ben, the young journalist, looked energized, his notebook open and a recorder at the ready. "Good timing," Rachel said, gesturing for Alex to sit. "Ben's been digging into the Hastings family, and what he's found is substantial." Ben leaned forward, his eyes lighting up. "William Hastings, Ryan's dad, has been funneling money through fake charities and town projects for years. Everything from a non-existent community garden initiative to ghost construction contracts. And guess who's footing the bill? The taxpayers," Alex guessed. "Bingo," Ben said. "It's not just fraud, it's extortion. Business owners are encouraged to donate to these projects, and anyone who refuses finds themselves on the wrong side of Ryan's gang." Rachel nodded. "And it gets worse. William's brother, Chief Marshal, has been using his position to cover for them. Complaints vanish, investigations stall, and witnesses are intimidated." Alex leaned back, his jaw tightening. "And all of this has been happening in plain sight because people are too scared to fight back." "Exactly," Rachel said. "But now we have a chance. With your footage of Ryan's warehouse and the testimonies we're collecting, we're starting to build a case." Ben grinned. "And once this story breaks, it won't just be local anymore. I've got contacts at the state paper who'd love to run something like this." That afternoon, Alex and Rachel went door to door, speaking with locals. Some were hesitant to talk, their fears still deeply ingrained, but others were ready to share their stories. Eleanor, the elderly shopkeeper, described how her store had been targeted with graffiti after she refused to raise prices for a Hastings-owned supplier. A mechanic named Victor recounted how his garage had been vandalized after he turned down a security contract from Ryan's crew. The most damning account came from Sarah Munoz, the owner of a small bakery. She had kept quiet for years, but Alex's persistence finally convinced her to open up. "They threatened my kids," she said, her voice trembling. "Said they'd make sure my son never got into college if I didn't cooperate. So, I paid them every month, like clockwork. And even then, they'd still show up, demanding more." Rachel took careful notes, her expression grim. "Sarah, would you be willing to testify? Your story could be pivotal." Sarah hesitated, her hands wringing. "I'm scared. What if they come after us?" "They won't," Alex said firmly. "Not if we stand together. This isn't just your fight, it's all of ours." After a long pause, Sarah nodded. "Okay, I'll do it." As the evidence piled up, Ben began drafting a story that would expose the Hastings family's corruption. But Alex knew that a public reckoning wouldn't be enough. They needed legal action to dismantle the Hastings influence for good. Rachel reached out to state investigators, providing them with a detailed report of their findings. It wasn't long before a response came. State officials would send investigators to Clearwater within the week. The news electrified the community. People who had been too afraid to speak out were now stepping forward, emboldened by the growing momentum. The community center became a hub of activity, with Rachel and Ben working tirelessly to organize statements and evidence. But the Hastings weren't blind to what was happening. One evening, as Alex was locking up the community center, he noticed a familiar red pickup idling nearby. Ryan and two of his cronies were watching him, their faces shadowed by the dim light of a street lamp. Alex ignored them, locking the door and heading toward his truck. But as he reached for the handle, Ryan called out, "Think you're a hero, Carter?" Ryan sneered, stepping out of the truck. "You're not saving this town. You're just making it worse." Alex turned to face them, his expression calm but unyielding. "What's worse, Ryan? People standing up to you, or knowing your time is almost up?" Ryan's smirk faltered, but he covered it with bravado. You don't know who you're messing with. My dad's already working on fixing this little misunderstanding. Alex took a step closer, his voice steady. Your dad's going to have bigger problems soon. And so will you. Ryan's friends shifted uncomfortably, clearly less confident than their leader. Sensing the shift, Ryan huffed and climbed back into his truck. This isn't over, he spat before speeding off. Alex watched them go, his chest tightening with a mix of anger and determination. He knew they'd try to strike back, and soon. The retaliation came in the form of an arson attempt. Late one night, Alex was jolted awake by the sound of shattering glass. He ran to his workshop to find flames licking the edges of the building, smoke already billowing into the night sky. Acting quickly, Alex grabbed a fire extinguisher and managed to douse the flames before they could spread. When the fire department arrived, Alex pointed out the remains of a Molotov cocktail near the broken window. But as expected, the police were slow to act. Chief Marshall arrived, his expression carefully neutral. "Looks like some kids got carried away," he said, echoing his earlier dismissal. Alex stepped closer, his voice cold. "This was arson, Chief, and we both know who's behind it." Marshall's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. As he turned to leave, Alex called after him. "You're running out of time, Chief. The truth's coming, whether you like it or not." The following morning, Ben's expose hit the state paper. The headline was damning: "Small Town, Big Secrets, Corruption and Intimidation in Clearwater." The article detailed everything: the extortion, the fake charities, the intimidation tactics, and named names, including William Hastings and Chief Marshall. The reaction was immediate. The Hastings' pristine reputation began to crumble as the story spread. Calls flooded the mayor's office demanding action, and state investigators announced their arrival would be expedited. But Alex knew the fight wasn't over. The Hastings were cornered now, and cornered animals were the most dangerous. "They'll try to push back," Rachel warned as they prepared for the investigators' arrival. "We have to be ready for anything." Alex nodded. "Let them try. This town is done being afraid." The storm was building, but for the first time, Clearwater was ready to face it head-on. The smell of ash still lingered in the air as Alex Carter repaired the last broken window in his workshop. The attempted arson had shaken him, but not in the way Ryan Hastings and his crew had intended. If anything, it had steeled his resolve. The Hastings had overplayed their hand, and now the community was rallying in a way Alex hadn't seen before. By midday, people began arriving at his shop, offering to help. Eleanor brought sandwiches and a thermos of coffee, while Victor, the mechanic, lent a hand fixing the door frame. Tom Reed showed up with his father, Michael, and together they worked to scrub away the soot stains on the walls. The sight of so many people standing together gave Alex hope. "This isn't just about the fire, is it?" Michael asked as he hammered a nail into a wooden beam. "No," Alex replied, his voice firm. "This is about letting them know we're not backing down." As the group worked, the conversation turned to the Hastings. Eleanor recounted years of subtle intimidation, from raised rent prices to unspoken rules about who could use the town square for events. Victor shared how he'd been forced to pay Ryan's crew a monthly protection fee just to keep his shop running. "What about you, Alex?" Tom asked, his young voice tinged with curiosity. "Why are you fighting so hard? You could have just left." Alex paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "Because I've seen what happens when bullies go unchecked. They don't stop until someone stands up to them, and I'm not the type to walk away." Tom nodded, his admiration for Alex clear. The boy had grown more confident over the past few weeks, no longer afraid to speak up. Alex could see the ripple effect spreading throughout the community, and it gave him a renewed sense of purpose. Later that afternoon, Alex joined Rachel Lawson at the community center, where they were finalizing preparations for the state investigators' arrival. The building buzzed with activity as locals dropped off written statements and copies of old complaints that had been ignored by the police. "This is more than I expected," Rachel said, flipping through a stack of affidavits. "If the investigators do their job, this could be enough to take down the entire Hastings operation." Alex leaned against the table, arms crossed. "And if they don't?" Rachel looked up, her expression resolute. "Then we'll keep fighting. But I think they will. Ben's article put them under a spotlight they can't ignore." As if on cue, Ben burst into the room, his face flushed with excitement. "You're not going to believe this," he said, holding up his phone. "I just got a tip. William Hastings is holding a meeting with the town council tonight at his estate. Word is, he's trying to cut a deal to shut this whole thing down." Alex's jaw tightened. "And let me guess, Chief Marshal will be there too." "Of course," Ben said. "They're desperate." Rachel frowned. "If they're meeting in private, it's probably to coordinate their response to the investigation. They'll claim it's about town business, but we know better." Alex's mind raced. "We need to make sure whatever they're planning doesn't work." Ben grinned. "Already ahead of you. I've got a source willing to let me in as a caterer. If I can get close enough, I might be able to record something useful." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "That's risky. If they catch you—" "They won't," Ben interrupted. "I'll be careful." Alex nodded. "Do it. But if you get even a whiff of trouble, you get out of there." As night fell, Alex kept busy by helping locals fortify their businesses and homes. He could feel the tension in the air. Ryan and his gang were quiet, too quiet, and Alex suspected they were planning something. Around midnight, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Ben. "Got it? Audio files incoming. They're panicking. Call me in the morning." Alex exhaled in relief, but his rest was short-lived. At 2 in the morning, the sound of screeching tires jolted him awake. He grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside, just in time to see Ryan's red pickup speeding away from the Reed's house. The truck's taillights disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind a shattered porch light and spray-painted threats on the garage door. Alex called Michael Reed, who confirmed that the family was safe but shaken. "We'll clean it up in the morning," Michael said, his voice weary. "But this has to stop, Alex." "It will," Alex promised. "Soon." The next day, the state investigators arrived. A convoy of unmarked vehicles rolled into Clearwater, and the sight alone was enough to send ripples through the town. By noon, they were combing through the evidence at the community center, speaking with Rachel and several witnesses. Alex watched from the sidelines as the lead investigator, a sharp-eyed woman named Agent Ward, reviewed Ben's recordings. Her expression grew darker with each passing minute. "This is damning," Ward said finally. "We've got evidence of extortion, fraud, and conspiracy. Enough to bring charges against William Hastings, Chief Marshal, and several members of the town council." "What about Ryan?" Alex asked. Ward's lips thinned. "He's small-time compared to his father, but we'll charge him too. His gang's intimidation tactics tie directly into the larger operation." Rachel leaned forward. "So what happens now?" "We move fast," Ward said. "If we're lucky, we can execute warrants by tomorrow morning." True to her word, the next day saw a flurry of arrests. Ryan and his gang were rounded up at the warehouse, their attempts to resist quickly subdued by officers who weren't under Chief Marshal's thumb. William Hastings was taken into custody at his estate, his confident smirk fading as he was led away in handcuffs. Chief Marshal, caught off guard at the police station, was the last to go, his protests drowned out by the snap of handcuffs. The town square was buzzing with energy as word of the arrests spread. Locals gathered in small groups, sharing cautious smiles and quiet cheers. For the first time in years, Clearwater felt free. Alex stood near the community center steps, watching as people began to reclaim their town. Linda approached, her face beaming with gratitude. "You did it," she said. "No," Alex replied, shaking his head. "We all did." As the sun set over Clearwater, Alex allowed himself a rare moment of peace. The fight wasn't over. There would be trials, fallout, and attempts by the Hastings family to rebuild their power. But for now, the town had won a hard-fought victory, and Alex knew he'd be there to see it through. The courtroom was packed, its wooden pews filled with a mix of Clearwater's residents, reporters, and lawyers. The Hastings family was finally facing justice. At the defendant's table, William Hastings sat stoically in a tailored suit, his face impassive despite the gravity of the charges against him. Ryan sat beside his father, his usual cocky demeanor replaced by a look of simmering resentment. Alex Carter stood at the back of the room, arms crossed, his calm exterior masking the fire within. For weeks, He and the community had poured their energy into exposing the corruption that had plagued Clearwater for years. Now, as the trial began, he could only hope that the system would deliver the justice they had fought so hard to achieve. The prosecutor, Valerie Knight, was relentless. She opened with a powerful statement, painting a vivid picture of a town held hostage by the Hastings family's corruption. For years, this family has used fear, intimidation, and illegal influence to control Clearwater, Valerie said, her voice firm. Today, we will show not only how they harmed individual lives, but how they damaged the very fabric of this community. The prosecution began with Ryan's crimes. Witness after witness took the stand, describing years of harassment, vandalism, and violence. Sarah Munoz, the baker, recounted the threats made against her children. Victor, the mechanic, described the financial stranglehold Ryan's gang had imposed on his business. Eleanor spoke about the intimidation tactics that had silenced the town for decades. The most damning testimony came from Tom Reed, who stood tall and confident as he recounted the harassment his family endured. "They wanted us gone from the moment we arrived," Tom said. "Ryan and his gang made it clear we weren't welcome. But thanks to Mr. Carter, we realized we didn't have to live in fear." Tom's words struck a chord with the jury. Alex couldn't help but feel proud of the young man, who had transformed from a fearful boy into a courageous voice for change. As the trial shifted focus to William Hastings, Valerie unveiled the financial records unearthed by Ben Collins and corroborated by state investigators. The evidence was overwhelming: fake charities, fraudulent invoices, and shell accounts that funneled money from taxpayers into the Hastings family's pockets. Rachel Lawson took the stand to explain how the Hastings used their wealth and connections to quash dissent. "This wasn't just about money," Rachel said, her voice steady. "This was about power. William Hastings created a system where he could act with impunity, and his son weaponized that power to terrorize anyone who challenged them." When Ben was called to testify, he recounted his investigative work, detailing how he had uncovered the web of corruption. "The Hastings didn't just intimidate individuals," Ben said. "They undermined the rule of law itself. But the people of Clearwater showed that even the most entrenched systems can be dismantled when a community stands together." William Hastings's defense team tried to argue that the evidence was circumstantial and the witnesses unreliable. They painted the Hastings as benefactors who had been misunderstood and scapegoated. But their arguments fell flat against the mountain of evidence. Ryan's lawyer attempted to frame him as a misguided young man influenced by his father, but Valerie wasn't having it. "Misguided doesn't excuse criminal behavior," she said. "Ryan Hastings didn't act out of ignorance. He acted out of entitlement, knowing his family would shield him from consequences." The turning point came when Chief Marshall, facing his own charges, agreed to a plea deal in exchange for testifying against William Hastings. The courtroom went silent as Marshall described how he had covered up Ryan's crimes and suppressed complaints under his brother's orders. When the jury returned with their verdict, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. On the charge of extortion, we find the defendant William Hastings guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit fraud, we find the defendant William Hastings guilty. On the charge of harassment, we find the defendant Ryan Hastings guilty. On the charge of assault, we find the defendant Ryan Hastings guilty. The verdicts continued, each one a nail in the coffin of the Hastings family's reign. Alex let out a slow breath as the weight of the moment sank in. The sentencing was swift. William Hastings was given 20 years in federal prison for his role in the corruption, with no chance of parole for at least 15 years. Ryan received 7 years for his crimes, while the other gang members faced sentences ranging from 3 to 5 years. Chief Marshall, though spared the harshest penalties due to his cooperation, was stripped of his badge and sentenced to 5 years in prison. As the Hastings were led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, the community erupted into applause. It wasn't just about punishment, it was about reclaiming their town. The days that followed were transformative. Without the Hastings family's shadow looming over Clearwater, the town began to rebuild. Businesses reopened, families returned, and a sense of hope permeated the air. Alex was at the center of it all, not as a leader but as a steadying presence, always ready to lend a hand. At the community center, a celebration was held to honor the town's resilience. Linda, Eleanor, Michael Reed, and countless others thanked Alex for his role in bringing the community together. "You didn't just stand up to the Hastings," Eleanor said, raising a glass. "You showed us we could stand up too." Alex smiled, his usual quiet demeanor softening. "I just gave you the push. The rest was all of you." As the sun set over Clearwater that evening, Alex stood on the porch of his workshop, watching the town he now called home. Rachel joined him, a cup of coffee in hand. "Thinking about leaving?" she asked, half teasing. Alex shook his head. "Not a chance. This town still needs rebuilding." Rachel smiled. "It's lucky to have you." "Not just me," Alex replied, looking out at the lights of the town. "We've all got work to do. But for the first time, I think we're ready for it." Clearwater wasn't perfect, but it was healing. And Alex Carter knew that sometimes the greatest battles weren't just about fighting the bad. They were about building something better in its place.